Welcome back to the Rooted Wild podcast, a space to reconnect with your inner and outer landscapes. And welcome to Season 3. I'm your host, Katherine Winkles, certified recreation therapist and therapeutic horticulture facilitator. This season, we're rooting into one central theme: cultivating resilience. Not resilience as hustle, not resilience as pretending everything is fine, and not resilience as being the person who never breaks down, never needs support, never slows down, and never asks for help. This season, we're talking about resilience the way nature teaches it. Cyclically, ecologically, relationally, imperfectly. Because forests don't heal by pretending the fire never happened. Prairies don't regenerate by staying untouched. Seeds don't sprout because they are forced to perform before the season is right. And we too are living systems. Over the past couple months, Rooted Wild has been a little quieter than usual. That pause wasn't because I ran out of things to say. If anything, it was because I was spending time living into the very ideas that we talk about here. During that time, I stepped back to pursue an additional credential in therapeutic horticulture, deepening my own learning, and spent some time reflecting on where I wanted this podcast to grow next. And honestly, that process became part of the inspiration for this season. As professionals, caregivers, educators, parents, and humans, navigating a very busy world, we often feel pressure to keep producing, keep creating, keep moving, and keep proving our value through output. But one of the questions I kept coming back to was this: what would it look like if I approached this podcast the same way I encourage listeners to approach their own lives? With intention, with curiosity, with periods of growth, but also periods of integration, and with enough space to learn something new before immediately turning it into content. The more time I spent studying therapeutic horticulture, reflecting on resilience, and paying attention to the lessons showing up in nature, the more I realized that Rooted Wild was ready to evolve. Not into something completely different, but into something deeper, a little more structured, a little more intentional, and hopefully a little more useful. So if you've been here since the beginning, thank you for your patience while I stepped away to learn, reflect, and grow. And if you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. I think you're arriving at a really exciting point in the journey, because Season 3 is all about cultivating resilience, not as endless productivity, but as our ability to adapt, recover, reconnect, and continue growing in sustainable ways. So let's pause. Before we go further, take one breath with me. Notice where your body is making contact with the surface beneath you. Notice your jaw, your shoulders, your hands, your breath. You do not have to arrive perfectly to begin. You only have to arrive honestly. And today, we're asking, what does resilience really mean? Here's what we're rooting into today. We're going to explore resilience through several lenses. First, we'll look at how toxic productivity has distorted our understanding of resilience. Then we'll talk about nervous system recovery and why rest is not a reward for finishing everything. It's part of how living systems stay well. We'll move into our first field notes segment of this season, forest recovery after wildfire. Then we'll look at fire-adapted species, plants and trees that remind us that disturbance is not always the end of the story. We'll also be bringing in recreation therapy through the idea of restorative leisure and leisure coping and adaptation theory. It helps explain why meaningful leisure can support coping, identity, and adaptation during stress. This season, we're also introducing biophilic case studies so you can learn more about ways nature has influenced our built world, and community reflections, where I share insights contributed by one of our podcast listeners. And finally, we'll close with a grounding practice and a reflection you can carry into your week. So, the productivity myth. Somewhere along the way, resilience became tangled up with productivity. We started praising people for how much they could carry. The person who keeps showing up exhausted, the caregiver who never asks for support, the healthcare worker who pushes through compassion fatigue, the parent who has no time to recover, the creative person who turns every hobby into a side hustle, the helper who becomes so good at helping others, they forget that they're also a living body with needs. And culturally, we often call that resilience. But I want to gently challenge that. Because sometimes what we're calling resilience is actually survival mode. Sometimes what looks like strength is a nervous system that has not had permission to come down. Sometimes what looks like discipline is fear. Sometimes what looks like productivity is depletion with a calendar. Chronic stress can keep the body mobilized for threat, and over time, that sustained demand can have effects on health, mood, attention, sleep, and emotional regulation. From a nervous system perspective, we are not designed to live in constant activation. We can respond to stress, we can mobilize, we can perform, we can protect, but we are also meant to recover. A healthy system is not one that is always on. A healthy system is one that can move between activation and restoration. And this is where I think nature gives us a better model. Resilience is not the ability to override your limits forever. Resilience is the ability to stay in relationship with your limits, adapt to changing conditions, and recover enough to keep living meaningfully. This is where recreation therapy has so much to offer, because leisure is often misunderstood as extra, something frivolous, something we do when the real work is done. But in recreation therapy, leisure can be functional, it can be restorative, and it can be identity giving. It can help people reconnect with choice, autonomy, pleasure, mastery, social connection, and meaning. Leisure is not just free time. It can also be a psychological experience shaped by freedom, choice, and personal meaning. When people are burned out, grieving, recovering, caregiving, living with chronic pain, or navigating major life transitions, meaningful leisure can become part of how they remember who they are outside of what they produce. One theory I want to keep returning to this season is leisure coping and adaptation theory, associated with the work of Yoshitaka Iwasaki. At its heart, this theory helps us think about leisure as more than entertainment. Leisure can support coping, stress management, connection, meaning making, and adaptation during life experiences that are difficult. That matters because burnout recovery is not just about doing less. It's also about restoring access to the parts of life that make us feel human. So I want to ask you, when was the last time you felt restored, not just distracted? When was the last time an activity gave something back to you? Not because it was productive, not because it improved your brand, not because it checked a box, but because it helped you return to yourself. Let's move into our first field notes segment of the season. Today's field notes: forest recovery after wildfire. When we see a burned landscape, it can look like the end. Blackened trunks, ash-covered soil. Silence where there was once canopy and birdsong. And I want to be careful here. Fire can be devastating. Wildfires can destroy homes, habitats, communities, and lives, so we're not romanticizing destruction. But ecologically, fire is also part of the life cycle of many landscapes. Some ecosystems evolved with fire. Some forests and grasslands depend on periodic disturbance to clear accumulated material, return nutrients to soil, open space for sunlight, and create the conditions for new growth. This is where ecological resilience becomes such a powerful teacher. A resilient ecosystem is not one that never experiences disturbance. It's one that can absorb disturbance, reorganize, and continue its essential functions. And that is very different from perfection. So let's highlight some fire-adapted species. Think about lodgepole pine. Some lodgepole pines produce serotinous cones that are sealed with resin and may open after exposure to heat. Fire becomes part of the seed release story. Or giant sequoias, which are deeply connected to fire ecology. Fire can clear competing vegetation, expose mineral soil, and create openings where young seedlings have a better chance to grow. Or prairie grasses, whose roots often extend deep underground. Fire may burn what's visible above the surface, but the root system remains. And from that protected underground structure, growth can return. And there's something incredibly powerful about that image. The surface may be scorched, but the root system remains. And in burnout recovery, sometimes this is where we begin. Not with blooming, not with performance, not with immediate transformation, but with asking, what roots are still alive? What values remain? What relationships still nourish me? What parts of myself are asking not to be optimized, but protected? This brings us to the wild form lens. The wild form lens is where we ask, what changes when we stop looking at ourselves like machines and start looking at ourselves like living systems? And today's lens is this. Nature rarely pursues perfection. Nature pursues adaptation. A tree growing on a cliff doesn't grow like a tree growing in an open meadow. A plant in drought doesn't behave like a plant after rain. A forest after fire does not return by pretending it was never burned. It reorganizes. It responds to conditions. It sends energy where energy is most needed. And this is such an important reframe for those of us who have internalized perfectionism. Burnout often thrives in rigidity. Rigid expectations, rigid roles, rigid productivity standards, rigid self-worth. And perfectionism can make rest feel unsafe. If I slow down, am I falling behind? If I need help, am I failing? If I change direction, was the old path a waste? If I can't do what I used to do, who am I now? But ecological resilience says adaptation is not failure. Adaptation is intelligence. Changing shape in response to reality is not weakness. It's survival. It's wisdom. It's how living systems continue. The healthiest ecosystems are not the most controlled. They are the most adaptable. For our botanical focus today, I wanted to stay with fire-adapted species. These are plants that have developed traits that allow them to survive, recover from, or even benefit from fire-prone environments. Some have thick bark, some resprout from protected buds, some hold seeds until heat, smoke, or post-fire conditions support germination. Some survive because their root systems are protected underground. And therapeutically, these plants give us language. They help us talk about what is protected below the surface. They help us talk about readiness. They help us talk about the difference between destruction and transformation. They help us ask what conditions are needed for recovery. I think prairie grasses may be one of the best teachers for burnout recovery because so much of their resilience is underground. We tend to admire what is visible: blooms, height, color, output. But the real survival strategy is often hidden. Deep roots, stored energy, connection to soil, capacity to return after disturbance. And maybe that is something we need to remember. Your resilience may not look impressive from the outside while you're recovering. It may look like sleeping more, saying no, cooking a real meal, going outside for 10 minutes, letting yourself enjoy something without monetizing it, rebuilding trust with your body. That counts. That is root work. For our biophilic case study today, I want to introduce Maggie's Centers. Now, this is a new segment for us here on the Rooted Wild podcast, and one I'm excited to bring back in the next episode. For anyone not familiar with biophilic design, this is an architectural philosophy that seeks to bring users of the space closer to nature itself or natural elements. Several studies have been done on the benefits of incorporating biophilic designs into healthcare spaces to improve quality and efficiency of care while reducing physical and emotional stress experienced while receiving services. Maggie's Centers are cancer support spaces in the UK and beyond that are known not only for the services they offer, but for the way architecture, gardens, light, and atmosphere are treated as part of the care. Their own design philosophy emphasizes the importance of architecture and gardens in creating supportive environments. What I love about these spaces is that they challenge the idea that healing environments should feel sterile, intimidating, or purely clinical. They often incorporate natural light, garden views, domestic feeling kitchens or gathering spaces, and human-scaled design. The point is not just visual beauty, it is nervous system communication. A space can say, brace yourself, or a space can say, you can soften here. This matters for burnout because many people are trying to recover inside environments that keep asking them to perform. Harsh lighting, constant noise, clutter, no access to daylight, no sensory refuge, no privacy, no green view, no transition space between roles. So when we talk about cultivating resilience, we're not only talking about mindset, we're also talking about environment. What does your space ask of your nervous system? Does it invite recovery, or does it keep you activated? Let's take a moment to practice this. You can do this seated, standing, indoors, outdoors, wherever you are. Begin by noticing the environment around you. Noticing light. Is it bright, dim, warm, cool, natural, artificial? Notice sound. Are there layers of sound? A hum, a voice, birds, traffic, wind, silence. Notice texture, the fabric against your skin, the floor beneath your feet, the air on your face. Notice temperature. Does your body feel like it's bracing against the environment or settling into it? Now, notice one thing in your environment that feels supportive. It may be small. A plant, a color, a window, a cup of tea, a soft blanket, a patch of sunlight, a quieter corner. Let your attention rest there for a breath. And ask yourself, what helps me soften? What helps me return? What helps me feel rooted? This season, I also wanted Rooted Wild to become more community connected. So, I'll be inviting listener reflections, questions, stories, and insights throughout the season. For this episode, one of my favorite listeners in Austin, Texas, wanted to impart some of their own wisdom. When asked for a technique or skill that has served them well and they think others would benefit from implementing, this listener recommends the Little Prince centering method. Now, here's my disclaimer. Read up on it if you're still interested and have more questions, or reach out on Facebook and Instagram so we can dialogue more. But from what I have surmised on this method, it can be broken into 3 parts. The first part is daily tending of the planet, or simply managing your own life and responsibilities, addressing problems while they are small before they get to be overwhelming. This can be as small as brushing your teeth, or sleep hygiene, or stretching to reduce aches and pains. Proactive stress management before you hit burnout or meltdown stages. The second part is to ground yourself in the relationships, values, and duties you dedicate your time and attention to. And thirdly, to center your life on curiosities and emotional resonance, things unseen to the eye, but that invite a sense of much-needed wonder back into adulthood. If you haven't heard, whimsy is making a comeback, so use this as your opportunity to manage your life circumstances while the problems are small, before they get overwhelming, and find your satisfaction and peace in the areas you choose to dedicate your time and attention to. Whether it's your partner or your craft, your family and friends, pets or plants, and try to let your personal curiosities guide some of that time obligation decision making for you. Only you can make time for the things you enjoy. I personally love that this starts out strong with a nature to self-care parallel, where caring for your environment extends to caring for your physical body. Our connections matter. The people we pour our time into, the skills we intentionally develop, the values we live by are all pillars to find strength in. And the simple act of letting yourself wonder and be creative is harder to access the older you get, but it is a muscle that can be strengthened like any other. Now, if you have something you think other Rooted Wild podcast listeners would benefit from hearing, reach out so I can include your recommendation in an upcoming episode. For roots and resources this week, I want to offer a few pathways for deeper exploration. The first is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, a book which beautifully weaves indigenous wisdom, plant science, ecology, and relationship with the living world. The second is going to be self-study on leisure coping and adaptation theory, especially if you're interested in how meaningful leisure supports coping, identity, and adaptation during stress. And the third is to begin looking at ecological resilience and disturbance ecology, especially the idea that resilience is not about never being disturbed, but about how systems absorb, reorganize, and continue functioning after disturbance. Before we close, I want to return to the question we began with. What does resilience really mean? Maybe it means less than we were taught. Less proving, less performing, less forcing ourselves to bloom out of season. And maybe it means more than we were taught. More adaptation, more honesty, more recovery, more relationship, more root work. Ecological resilience reminds us that disturbance is not the same as failure. A burned forest is not worthless. A dormant seed is not lazy. A resting body is not unproductive. A person in recovery is not behind. So, this week, I invite you to notice where you may be asking yourself to be endlessly productive, when what you actually need is restoration. Ask, what is still rooted in me? What needs protection? What needs space? What is ready to regenerate? Slowly, honestly, and in season. Thank you for being here for the beginning of Season 3 of the Rooted Wild podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and stay wild.